Hi everybody. So last class we covered in general what HTML is for, what tags do, and a few basic tags and how they work. So you might recall HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the language that's used to organize the structure of a web page. And it does exactly what it describes. It marks up the text so that the web browser has some information about what's going on to the page. And we looked at some of the fundamental things that are in many web pages and saw how they worked, including generally tags have an opening tag and a closing tag, and all of the content that they apply to goes in between the opening and closing tag. There are a few exceptions to that, and we will actually get to some of those exceptions. In this video. You may have even noticed that the doc type tag does not have a closing tag, and there are a couple other tags like that as well. And that's just because they don't actually contain content; they just contain some other information, or maybe they do contain content, but they're not a container really. Like the tag itself holds all the necessary information, and it's not, sort of drawing a box around things like this H1 tag, for example, kind of creates. It actually contains the text in between the opening and closing tag. You'll see in a few moments. Most tags are like that. There are a couple exceptions though. So one thing I would like to point out is before we even add any more content that you can actually see in the page, you may recall that I actually, just for the sake of simplicity and you not having to look at a bunch of stuff you didn't understand, completely erased the head of this sample web page. So originally, when we first opened this, it started with something like this: head and a closing head tag, and everything in here was in fact important information. It just wasn't really necessary at the time. It's important for web browsers, but it wasn't really important for putting really basic text on the screen. But it is valuable information, and it really should be there. For example, there are a few meta tags. One of them, character set, that specifies what characters the web page uses. So UTF-8 is a particular set of characters. It's one of the most common. So that was the one that was the default that we had before. Another meta tag. All of these meta tags are metadata. They're data about your data. They're describing. They're telling the web browser some stuff it needs to know to better render your web page. Another thing that is really valuable was another meta tag for viewport. And the viewport helps the web page adapt to different screen sizes. So this one I'm going to set. I'm going to say width equals device dash width. So the screen, this just lets the browser know to adapt this web page to the width of the device that it's on. Really important in sort of today's web, where websites could be displaying on tiny phone screens or huge displays on a desktop. And then another thing that we cut out was the title. So the title is actually the thing that ends up at the top of the tab. So, for example, you know, if you look, if you look at the name on the tab for any website, that title is going to show up. I'm going to put Portland, Maine for mine. And you can add, whatever description you like for yours. And then finally, I'm just going to show you this. It was sort of something that REPL put into the default page that it brought up, was a link to CSS, which is something we haven't really got to yet, but we will eventually need this. I'm just going to show you what this tag will look like, just so you can see it. You don't really need this in yours, because we're not actually going to start styling this yet. I closed my tag a little early, so I close my quotes, then close my tag. There we go. Okay, so that's some stuff that we actually that we took out that really is important information, and it does belong there. So you should add that information back in, even if you're not currently using CSS. You really should get in a habit of linking to CSS, because the CSS file, I mean, it's in REPL, it auto generates an index.html, your original HTML file, a script.js, your sort of default JavaScript file, and style.css, the default CSS file, and all of those things are valuable things that we will eventually get to. You might as well get in the habit of including things like a link to your CSS file, because you will need that eventually when we do get to using CSS. Okay, so that's the stuff that belongs in the head, and now let's move on and continue adding some information that you can actually see on the screen. So there are a few more sort of really basic tags that are really common in the web, and I'm going to add a few more items to this. Web page, and you can go ahead and add a few of these items to yours, and just expand on the basic web page that you already started. So one basic tag that we kind of skipped over last time, we just didn't get to it yet, is the anchor tag, which is where you're going to put links to things. So take a look at this. Take a look at this down here, my list of items. Right now it's just a list of items, which is fine. As I said, here are a few top destinations, and I listed them, and they're just text that says that stuff. This is the web. One of the things that makes the web a web is that pages link to other pages. So, usually, oftentimes when sites refer to something, they point you how to get there using a link. So the way you set up a link is using an anchor tag, is A, and then A space href equals, and then inside quotation marks is where you put the URL of where you want the link to lead to. So for example, I have the Old Port Restaurant and Shopping District. So Old Port, Portland, Maine. And I'll just find, it looks like there's sort of an organization that advertises businesses in the Old Port District. That seems good. I will copy their URL, add that here, and then I have to close my anchor tag, so closing a tag. And if I reload this, sorry, bear with me just a minute, it looks like my REPL is not connecting. Alright, so my other link was broken. I'm not really sure why it was broken. It's possible that that server didn't like getting requests from REPL's emulator. I'm not really sure. So whatever the reason was, I changed my link to something that'll actually work. So you notice it really does work. You know, it works in the runner. It displays the site about the Old Port District in Portland. So that is the anchor tag, and that allows you to add links. So you should go ahead and add some links to your additional items in the list that you had in your website. And the next thing I'm going to add, another very common tag, pretty much one of the things the web is built around now, is images. The early web was pretty much entirely text. It's getting to the point where the web is getting more and more visual based on images and videos. So I'm going to show you the image tag, which is just img, and then you need to list a source of the image, equal sign, and then inside quotation marks, you're going to have to put the source. And there are two different ways to list a source of an image. So one way to do that is to actually have the file in the same directory where where your HTML file is, or a directory that it can navigate to, which means it's on the same computer. It's on the same device, the same server that's serving this page, and it can actually access it through the file name. So in this case, your server is being hosted by REPL, and if you upload an image, you can upload an image, and you can just give the location of the file. So, or you can just use the file name. So what I'm going to do is I am going to upload a file just to show you. Find a picture of Old Port. And so now notice that it's added over here. It's all in the same directory. There are no additional folders here. I could add a folder if I wanted to. If I clicked add folder, then I would have to, if I put stuff in that folder, maybe I could have an images folder if this site got really large and I started adding a lot of images and I wanted to manage everything that way. I could have an images folder, in which case I would have to tell the browser how to navigate to the images folder to then find my picture. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to say, because it's old_port.jpg, I'll just say it can find that at old_port.jpg. And pictures, it's good practice to include in alt text, which is basically just something that'll happen, instead of displaying an image. For example, it's actually a really common accessibility feature for blind people who use screen readers. So for example, if someone's looking at a website on their phone, well, not looking, but actually having the screen read to them by, for example, iPhone accessibility features because they are blind, instead of just having nothing happen, the screen reader on the phone will read the alt text instead of just leave, instead of leaving out this content. So for example, if it was a very interesting image, you could explain everything that's going on in it in the alt text. I'm just going to say, Old Port District at night. And then I'm going to close this image tag, and when I run this, you're going to notice that it's a gigantic image. The image that I chose just happened to be really large. So you're noticing that I'm, unlike last time, where all we had was content in between. All we had was content in between the tags, the opening tag and the closing tag. Now I'm adding a lot of content as part of the tags, all these things that the editor is actually turning purple. So these things are called attributes. These attributes just give, additional information that the browser needs to do its job. So for example, what character set are you using? Where can I find the CSS file? Where can I find the URL for the link? Where can I find the picture source? All of these attributes, some of them actually refer to styling, and it's usually better practice to do your styling in CSS, but since we're not really talking about CSS right now, let's just make an adjustment to the picture here as an attribute. Generally, we won't be doing much of this, but I'm going to do that for now just to show you that it's possible. You can actually I'm going to set the height to 150 pixels, and then if I could try to guess what the width would be, but there's a better chance of me just making it all stretchy and weird looking, so I'm just going to set it to automatic by typing auto, and it'll just it'll keep the same perspective, it'll keep the same ratio when it shrinks the picture. So now the picture is a much more reasonable size for this small web page. And so by adding the anchor tag with a link, and by adding an image tag with your image source, you've got some additional features on your website. Let me just show you one other way to go about adding a picture. Instead of, so for example, if you don't have, for some reason want to, or for whatever reason you want to, instead of having the picture uploaded and hosted on this up on the server where the page is being hosted, you can actually just point to a URL where the picture is located. So I'm going to quickly import this from a sample that I have rather than type it all out. Only if I can find my sample, of course. Or otherwise I might be typing it out. Well, this was supposed to be faster, because I was supposed to have a sample, but my sample is in REPL and the REPL isn't loading. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to type it out. So it's going to be structured exactly the same way as the other. Oh, of course it loads. Loads as soon as I'm about to move on. So let me just grab my sample that I was just going to import immediately. Let's go add this to the Portland Museum. So I'm just going to add the exact same thing. I already kind of preloaded this, so I can just paste it and not have to type all this stuff out and have you watch me type some more. I just added the exact same thing, but for the Portland Museum of Art. So I added an anchor tag, href attribute with the URL to get to the Portland Museum of Art. And if I run this, you'll see it's a link, and also there's a picture there. But notice where the picture came from. It didn't come from a picture file that I have uploaded here. It actually came from a URL. For the source attribute, where it says src equals, I just pasted a URL to where the image came from. You have to make sure you actually have the image URL and not just the URL of a site. So for example, let me just try to find that picture again. It was that Portland Museum of Art. And I think it was this one. So I mean, I didn't just open the page and include the URL for this whole page. I clicked on the image resource itself and let the image load in its own tab, and then I copied this URL because this is the image URL. That it just points directly to the image. So that's what I copied, and that's what I put in here. So there's two different ways to refer to an image source. One is a URL. One is the location of the file on your local server. So it's local, and this is not local. This is a network address. So all together, I've got I've added some metadata, added a title, added a link to my CSS that we aren't quite using yet, all inside the head. I've got anchor tags in my list items now, so that they are, instead of just being text, they're links, and I've got images so that you can kind of see a picture of what I'm talking about. So there are a few. Those are the most complicated. Those are the most complicated, really common tags. There are a few other really common tags. There are a few other really common tags in HTML that I just want to point out. Just so that you can see that they exist. So let's see. So let's just say, for example, so if you want to make something bold, so the way you can make something bold, I'll make this here a few top destinations. I'm going to add a strong tag, and everything inside the strong tag, if I run this, strong is not what I was going for. Right? It makes the text bold. It doesn't get any larger, it's just bolder. Alternatively, instead of bold, you can get italics by doing EM for emphasis. And these tags are actually recommended over. There are tags for bold and italic, like B for bold and I for italic, but emphasis and strong are recommended for the same reason the alt tag is recommended, is that they give additional information to things like screen readers. So if somebody's having a screen read to them, the screen reader can actually interpret that and give emphasis, or some sort of extra strength to the speech, whereas it won't do that if you just say bold or italic. So those are the recommended ways of marking up that text. Another basic tag type that you might see in most websites is actually a comment. So comment has exclamation dash dash. Let's type this is a comment dash dash closed, and you'll notice it gets grayed out in the editor. It doesn't do anything. If I reload this, it doesn't display. There's nothing there. This is how if you want to put notes in your code that don't do anything, right? This is just a note. For whatever reason you want to put notes in the code that aren't content. It's just like a note to yourself or a note to other other programmers that indicate what the purpose of some piece of code is. That's the way to do comments in your code in HTML. So that covers a lot of the most common tags in HTML. There are a lot of tags. We couldn't possibly even get to all of them in this class. I think there are over 100, but these are the most common, and we'll be continuing to introduce more and more new ones. But I think that is enough for now for you to expand this and add a few additional features.